So in the words of Left Eye or Salt and Pepper, let's talk about sex. Vanessa Marin, she is licensed psychotherapist specializing in sex therapy. She has bachelor's degrees in human sexuality and sociology from Brown University and a master's degree in counseling psychology. She has written for the New York Times, Allure, and Lifehacker, and has been featured many times in major publications like Oprah, Daily, Harper's Bazaar, Vogue, and Real Simple. And sitting next to her is her husband, Xander, who I will just briefly say is a regular dude who left a cushy career in tech once he realized it's more fun to talk about sex with his wife. So Publishers Weekly is called Sex Talk, has said anyone looking to improve their communication with a partner will find valuable takeaways, which is high praise. The normally loquacious New York Times, John Gottman, just said simply, buy this book. And we couldn't agree more. It's been a great seller for us. We're so pleased to have Vanessa and Xander, so please welcome them.
Thank you so much for coming. It's really cool to have grown up in this bookstore, spending all of my allowance in that section, and to now get to be back here with a book that we wrote. So thank you for having us.
Well, it's our pleasure. I got to ask you a question to start off. How did you get into this field?
The reason I got into this field is standing right back over there, my parents, and their very awkward attempt at giving me the talk. It is no coincidence that I wrote a book called Sex Talks, because it really did all trace back to that awkward attempt at the talk. I just remember at the time, I didn't have any idea that I could do sex therapy as a career, but I just remember them attempting this conversation and me being 12 years old and wondering, why is this so awkward? I do have a lot of questions. There are a lot of things I'm curious about. Why is this so weird? I want to talk about it. And that moment really stuck with me, that idea of why does it have to be so hard? And I don't think it should have to be so hard. So I kept coming back to wanting to help people talk about it more openly. Please come in closer.
Come on in, yeah. And how did you and Xander meet?
We met in 2007 at a Christmas party at Xander's house. Very sketchy bachelor pad that he was living in with 4 other guys, one who was sleeping on the sofa in San Francisco. Yep. And we had 2 friends who set us up, told each other that the other person thought they were cute. Neither one of us had said anything.
It was the easiest getting together of all time, and it stayed that way.
So you had met, had Vanessa been studying by the time you had met?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Vanessa hadn't yet gone to grad school, but had done a lot of research and internships in the area, and sex therapy was her career aspiration. And I thought that was very cool. I thought it was really cool to tell my friends that I was dating a future sex therapist, but I was dead scared of talking about our own sex life together, and it took me a long time to get more comfortable with that. And a lot of those stories are in this book.
So a lot of this is personal inside the book then.
Yeah.
It's a very personal book. We have a little bit of a vulnerability hangover sometimes, like, whoa, I can't believe we shared some of those stories, but it was really important to us. We knew that we were asking the reader to be very vulnerable in having these conversations with their partner, so we wanted to go first and share the ways that we've had these conversations, all the lessons that we've learned the hard way by doing the exact opposite of what we now tell people to do, and just show people that having these conversations can create the kind of intimacy that we're all really wanting.
For one last question before you talk about it, is this, how fun was this to write this book?
It was fun, and it was really challenging and interesting. I mean, I think we had a number of these conversations for the first time or in a brand new way. So there were times that there was a lot of laughter and joy, and there were times that it felt very vulnerable and challenging, but it was a really intimacy building experience for us to get to write it together.
That's cool. Well, please talk about it.
So we wanted to read a portion of one of the chapters for you guys, just to give you a little sense of what it's like. Happy to take any questions that anybody has about any of it. And we will also share with you what the 5 conversations are, because we're not gatekeepers here.
No secrets.
But I think, for us, the idea of talking about sex is nothing new. I think we've all had that moment when we're up late at night on incognito mode at our phone, Googling these questions that we don't want to ask anybody else. And we see at the end of every article, like, well, just talk about it with your partner. But the advice always ends there. And I think it leaves us with this feeling of, okay, but how? Like, what do I say? How do I say it? When do I say it? So we wanted to make a super practical book that would lead you through exactly how to talk about sex, and to really narrow down this huge topic into just 5, anybody can do just 5, conversations that we think every couple will benefit from. So we start off with acknowledgement, which is simply getting comfortable talking about sex, because so few people have done that in their relationships.
Yeah, like sex is a thing. We have it.
We move on to connection. What do we need to feel close to each other so that when we get into bed at the end of the night, we don't feel like strangers. We actually want to be intimate with each other. The 3rd conversation is desire. What do we each need to feel turned on, to get excited about being intimate with each other? Moves us straight into conversation 4, pleasure. What do we each need to feel good and feel like this was a satisfying and enjoyable experience?
Something we want to keep coming back to.
Yeah. And then we wrap things up with exploration. What should we try next? So really helping couples actually follow the advice to spice it up. We've all heard that advice as well, but very few of us are actually following through on it. So those are the 5 conversations. If anybody has any questions about them, please let us know. But I will start with reading about 15 minutes. Reading the beginning of chapter 1, which we called Destroying the Fucking Fairy Tale. Do you think there's any hope for us? Francesca's voice breaks as she struggles to get the words out. I love him so much. I can't imagine life without him, but I also can't continue like this. Francesca is one of my oldest and best friends, and her husband Jake is a real gem of a human being too. They're both warm, generous, intelligent, and regularly bring me to the brink of peeing in my pants from laughing so hard. Their love story is classic. They were set up by a mutual friend in a land before dating apps, Francesca likes to say. And their marathon blind date at a tiny Italian trattoria only came to an end when the staff politely kicked them out. Francesca and Jake gracefully slid past every milestone, becoming exclusive, getting engaged and then married, and having 2 beautiful and mischievous children. Things seemed perfect from the outside, but if you looked closely, you could see signs of cracking in the facade. Francesca had a certain way she liked to do things around the house, and would get over the top irritated at Jake for messing up the pantry organization or folding the towels like a heathen. Jake tended to withdraw, retreating to the basement to watch his beloved Packers and losing himself in long hours at his law firm. The raucous date nights they had once cherished became increasingly infrequent, especially once they became parents. Francesca and Jake's sex life had grown more complicated too. At the beginning of their relationship, Francesca and I would spend entire brunches dissecting every last detail of their wildly passionate bedroom escapades. But over time, Francesca's bragging turned into venting. She disclosed that she rarely initiated sex. Even though she considered herself a feminist, she still had the nagging feeling that it should be up to the guy to make it happen. Unbeknownst to Jake, Francesca had been faking orgasms with increasing frequency over the years. Her performance had become half-hearted, and she was growing resentful of him for rolling off of her right after his own climax. Sometimes I don't even bother to fake an orgasm, she tells me, but he still seems to think that once he's done, we're done. Separately, Jake confided in me that Francesca sometimes seemed disinterested and distant during sex, and he would lose his erection in those moments. He'd catch himself feeling anxious the next time they started taking their clothes off, wondering if he was going to be able to stay hard. Their frequency had dropped to maybe 1/4 of what it was at the beginning of their relationship, and their satisfaction was at an all-time low. A Category 5 stress hurricane pushed everything to the surface. In a single week, their daughter broke her leg during gymnastics practice, their roof sprung a massive leak, and Jake got passed over for a promotion he'd been gunning for. The tension was palpable for days, and by Friday night, Francesca and Jake were looking forward to the moment they could finally relax. After the kids were asleep, they poured glasses of wine, crawled into bed, and turned on a movie. Francesca was just starting to drift off to sleep when Jake started rubbing her back. She tensed up immediately. She knew what his massage meant, but couldn't Jake see that his timing was ridiculously bad? Francesca whined, "Jay, I'm exhausted." Jake rolled over onto his side of the bed, letting out a dramatic sigh. His obvious disappointment set Francesca off in a way she had never before experienced. "How could you be thinking of sex at a time like this?" Francesca snarled at him. "Because I can't even remember the last time we had sex," Jake huffed back. The fight still had Francesca rattled on our walk the next morning. "I don't really know what to do," Francesca says. "I mean, he's right. I can't remember the last time we had sex either." She takes a deep breath and her voice goes soft and quiet. "It shouldn't be this hard, should it?" "Should we really get into it?" I ask. "Or did you just want to vent?" "I need you in full-blown sex therapist mode," she responds, rubbing at the bags under her eyes. "Help me fix this, please." Understanding why sex gets so complicated. What's the first step for Francesca, for me, and for you? Understanding that the fairy tale version of sex and relationships we all have in our heads is just that, a fairy tale. I like to call it the fucking fairy tale. Just like TV and the movies lead us to believe that we'll have a meet cute with our one true love, overcome some mild adversity, then live happily ever after, we're also fed an overly simplified version of what our sex life with said true love will be like. Hollywood sex always unfolds spontaneously and effortlessly, zero communication required. The chemistry is so intense you can practically feel it through the screen. Couples always orgasm in the same instant from 3 pumps of missionary position intercourse, and everyone seems wildly satisfied. When I ask people to describe their ideal sex life, the most common word I hear is natural. We crave that feeling of effortless we've witnessed on the screen countless times. Except that's not how it unfolds in our own relationships, and that leaves us feeling confused, scared, and even angry. Francesca tells me, "I guess I'm naive, but I didn't realize how much work relationships and sex take. Our connection was so strong at first that I assumed it would always be solid. When the spark fades, you almost resent the fact that you have to work at it, because in the movies, it all looks so easy." I know from personal experience that this transition from fairy tale to train wreck can be incredibly scary, so I run Francesca through the specific reasons why we find ourselves here in the first place. Because it happens to the best of us, and it's not entirely your fault. Blame your brain. Let's start with one of the most straightforward reasons chemistry with your partner feels so much stronger at the beginning of a relationship. Literal chemistry. In your early months together, the neurotransmitters in your brain go buck wild. The serotonin levels are similar to those in someone who has obsessive compulsive disorder, and the dopamine levels mimic being high on cocaine. It's that intense.
Wow.
But this stage can only last for 1 to 3 years max. At that point, your previously surging high-octane transmitters, serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine, get replaced with oxytocin and vasopressin, which are designed to help us relax and bond. We shift into creating deeper attachment to our partner and forging a strong, secure, lasting foundation. Brain chemistry isn't the entire picture, but it's useful to know that your brain is physically incapable of maintaining that same level of lust over the long term. If, like Francesca, you find yourself feeling sad and scared that it seems so much harder to be attracted to and turned on by your partner, stop judging yourself. Losing desire is actually more natural than feeling it constantly. The stress shutdown. As soon as I mention the word stress, Francesca rolls her eyes. I know, I'm too stressed, but that's just life. Like most of us, Francesca has gotten used to juggling never-ending responsibilities and ever-increasing pressure. It has become her default mode of functioning, so much so that in the rare moments when she's not busy, she finds herself feeling anxious. Most people don't realize that stress is the #1 sex drive killer. When you're stressed, your body thinks it's under attack. It goes into fight or flight mode, deciding whether to stay and duke it out or get the hell out of there. During those moments, your system releases a hormone called cortisol, which shuts down unnecessary functions so you can focus all your energy on protecting yourself. Libido is one of the first things to go. Think about our ancestors. If a caveman was being chased by a woolly mammoth, why would he also need to have an erection at the same time? If anything, a raging boner flapping around between his thighs is just going to slow him down. Cortisol is helpful if you are in danger in the moment, but when your body is constantly in that state of high tension, it basically ensures that your sex drive never kicks back into gear. When 2 becomes 3 or 4 or 5. When you have children, your focus changes. Francesca and Jake used to live in their own little world together, and while their children have been a happy addition, they've also dramatically changed the balance of things. Francesca and Jake aren't each other's primary focus anymore, and their list of responsibilities has exploded. As Francesca puts it, Jake started to feel like yet another item on the long list of people or things that need doing. Francesca also lovingly called her kids the greatest cockblocks of all time. The kids are always around. They manage to sneak into Francesca and Jake's bed most nights, and Francesca is usually nervous about them overhearing sex or barging in at the worst possible moment. Even when Francesca and Jake are alone, Francesca finds herself struggling to relax. She tells me, "It's like when you start working from home. Sometimes it's hard to separate your work time and your leisure time. Except with being a parent, you never get to log off. There really is no place in my home that I don't feel like a parent. At least with work, your boss doesn't wake you up in the middle of the night because they had another nightmare about monsters." Relationship researcher John Gottman found that 67% of couples report that their marital satisfaction plummeted after having kids. But like most parents, Francesca and Jake are also exhausted, too busy and overwhelmed to even put much thought into repairing their relationship. Francesca tells me, "It's easier to let things slide than to address them. I'm just so tired that a difficult conversation is the last thing I want to do, until I realize I'm in survival mode and unsure how to move forward with someone who's a roommate with whom I'm raising kids." The pain of rejection. At the beginning of a relationship, it feels easy to say yes to everything. You agree to all date night ideas, even the ones that feel a little out of your comfort zone. You take your partner up on most of their invitations to have sex. It feels like you have all this good energy and momentum propelling you forward. That all comes to a screeching halt when the word no enters your relationship vocabulary. I want to be perfectly clear in saying that you are always allowed to say no to anything for whatever reason. Rejection is a normal and healthy part of every relationship, but the problem is that none of us are prepared for it. Hearing the word no from our partner, especially when it comes to sex, typically brings up enormous amounts of shame. I have memories seared into my brain of Xander turning me down for sex, and the feelings of embarrassment and even humiliation that overcame me in those moments. Rejection feels so terrible that most of us will go to great lengths to avoid it. If your partner turns you down, your instinct is likely to stop initiating. But if no one is initiating, what do you think is going to happen to your sex life? Performance issues. Our bodies aren't machines, and they don't always do what we want them to do. It's normal to experience a dry vulva, a soft penis, or an orgasm that's too fast or takes too long. And stress can make all of these issues so much worse too. But performance issues definitely aren't a part of the fucking fairy tale, so that leaves us feeling like it's yet another thing we can't talk about openly. Great sexpectations, sexual perfectionism. The fucking fairy tale expectations of sex affect us on a relationship level, but also on an individual one. In the Hollywood version of sex, everyone knows what they're doing, and they look sexy doing it. No one ever has to ask for directions on how to perform varsity-level oral sex. No one ever has a pimple on their butt cheek or bits of toilet paper stuck in their labia. No one's ever thinking about their grocery list while being ravaged by their partner. It leaves us feeling like we have to be just as polished in the bedroom, a phenomenon I call sexual perfectionism. It's the desire to control every aspect of an interaction so that you seem flawless to your partner and to yourself. If you can't talk about sex in your relationship, sexual perfectionism takes a dangerously strong hold on you. As we walk our dogs on the beach, Xander tells me about how this happened for him early in our relationship. I didn't feel comfortable talking about sex, so the stakes felt so much higher. I felt like I had to be perfect at sex, so there would never be anything for you to say about it. But no one ever taught me what it means to be good at sex, so I turned to movies and porn. Sexual perfectionism leaves no room for the intricacies of being human, and it tells us that physical intimacy needs to fit an exacting set of standards. Here are some of the ways my clients have described their expectations of sex. I should be able to get turned on spontaneously and easily. I should have a hot body that looks incredible in every position. I should be confident, wild, and uninhibited. Every time I try something new, it should happen exactly as I planned. We need to have simultaneous orgasms every time. I should satisfy my partner and be the best they've ever had. Pro tip, anytime you hear yourself saying the word should, you're probably veering into perfectionism territory. I had a great professor in grad school who used to tell me, Vanessa, stop shoulding all over yourself. For Francesca, perfectionism takes the form of being too afraid to initiate. She had tried to be more assertive with a previous partner, but he laughed at her and called her awkward. So she's extremely hesitant to initiate sex with Jake. In addition to her fears of not being sexy enough with her technique, she worries about how rejected she'd feel if Jake said he wasn't in the mood. I'm already self-conscious enough about my mom belly. If he said no to me, I would take it so personally, like it would be a confirmation that he's not attracted to me anymore, and he wishes I had my old body back. My story is different from Francesca's, but I can relate. I spent years chasing my individual version of the fucking fairy tale. I wanted to be perfectly sexy and confident, seducing my partner with every look and touch. I fixated on my partner's experience and ignored my own, trying to give them the impression that we were clicking during sex. I faked pleasure, faked orgasm, faked pretty much everything, all in the service of sexual perfectionism. But my performance wasn't good for anyone, and I doubt yours is either. Sexual perfectionism leads to sex that is high on awkwardness and pressure and low on enjoyment and intimacy. It even chips away at your sex drive. Why would you crave such an anxiety-inducing experience? But perhaps the worst side effect of sexual perfectionism is that it leaves you stuck. You're unsatisfied with your non-fairy tale sex life, bored of repeating the exact same routine, but you're also too self-conscious to suggest or start something different. We all want to see ourselves as someone who is great at sex, so we stick with what we know out of the fear that if we try something new, it won't go perfectly. The devil you know is better than the devil you don't, right? But in this book, I'm asking you and your partner to step outside your comfort zone, be vulnerable, and take some risks. So we've got to work together to overcome your sexual perfectionism. Happy to take any questions, or you guys can come up and we can sign books and hang out.
Talking about sex is a little awkward. In your book, you've got kind of the male perspective and female perspective. There's a difference. And what you just read was, from the female perspective, but it's, can you elaborate on that a little bit? I mean, orgasm for a man and a woman is going to be sort of coming from a little different direction, but it's going to try to find the same place.
Yeah, we wanted to write the book for everyone, so couples of all identities and orientations and configurations, but obviously we're a male-female couple ourselves, and so we wanted to be able to address things from different perspectives. So you want to talk about your little corners of the chapter?
So Vanessa wrote the majority of the book, but I jump in at least once in every chapter to give my take on some of the issues in there. And so it was really fun to be involved and just get to share a bit of my own personal experience, stuff I've talked about with friends, or just my experience of perhaps what the partner's perspective is when their partner is going through certain issues.
And we also like to talk about sometimes the stereotypical gender roles are actually quite reversed. So one of the statistics that we give in the book is, we have the stereotype that men are the ones who always want sex and always want it more, but we polled our audience and actually 45% of male-female relationships, the woman was the one who wanted sex more. So we also like to talk about the ways that those stereotypes might be inaccurate and hurting our relationships.
The reason I asked the question is you talked about stress, and don't hold this against me, but a lot of times I think men use sex as a stress release.
There's a whole model called the sex personality types, and one of the personality types is exactly that.
Okay,
You should jump right to that section.
That's why I'm trying to quantify that.
We call it the decompressor.
Put their name in the audience so people bring that up, right?
I may have to buy that book.
Do you recommend reading the book out loud with your partner?
Yeah, I think that can be a really fun way to do it, to just make it feel like this little special moment between the two of you, even if you've had a busy day, that maybe you can get in bed together and spend 5 minutes reading a chapter, taking turns reading it to each other.
Yeah, we've gotten a lot of really great feedback from couples who have been doing that together. But of course, we also want to acknowledge that, in any relationship, partners are not always going to be on the exact same page when it comes to working on your relationship. And the reality very often is that, one person does need to step up and kind of, take the lead. And so, we wrote the book so that it can be read by one person. And, you can, either work these conversations into your everyday life because your partner knows you're reading the book, or because they don't know you're reading the book. We talk about ways to just, suddenly talk about these things. It's not like, oh, we read this book and I'm reading this book and we have to do this list of conversations.
Now's your chance.
Well, come on.
My partner and I are listening to the audiobook together, and it's been really good. We can pause it together and talk about things, and it's been a way to do that nicely.
Oh, that's awesome.
Nice.
I love that. Yeah, just make it feel like a little mini date night that you get to have together. Yeah, it's really cool.
I have a question. Do you guys talk about how to approach sex when one partner has a bad history with sex, they have a bad relationship with it, either an addiction or they were a victim of sexual assault or anything like that?
Yeah, that is covered in the first part of the book. The first part of the book is all about understanding yourself better. And so we do talk about all the baggage that we all have around sex, ways that we were, taught misinformation, shame that we might have, religious beliefs, all kinds of stuff. So we talk about that. We do talk specifically about sexual abuse as well, because it's unfortunately so common. And Xander even wrote a section about what to do if you're the partner of somebody who's experienced sexual abuse.
Yeah, how to be a supportive partner.
Wow.
How much are the books?
How much are the books?
It's on the back there. I'm sorry.
$35.
No, I think it's 27.
Oh, 27. $27.99. Yeah.
How do you think that online dating has either helped or hindered people's sex lives, either male or female?
It's a good question, and we have to give the caveat that we also met in the land before dating apps. I mean, I think that one of the biggest struggles that comes up for people is the overwhelm of all the choices that you have, and I think it can really lead to this, we put so much pressure to find the exact right person, the exact right fit. And sometimes that can come up with sex as well. Obviously the dating and sex can be really intertwined in those ways. So I think it's this overwhelm by all the choice and the pressure to find that one perfect person.
I think also there can be this sort of grass is always greener idea, because it's so easy to swipe and have so many options. And so I think that can also lead to a dynamic where we think, okay, well, it's got to go really well. It's got to go really perfect the first time. And if it doesn't go perfectly the first time, it can feel like, okay, well then maybe it's better to just, move on to the next option. And so I think that can be an interesting dynamic that may not have been so present before online dating.
Sure. yeah, even more pressure on those first moments.
Yeah.
Yes, Dad?
We got to get Dad on YouTube here.
Now he's been outed.
Rebuttal?
Defend yourself.
Do you talk about generational changes in attitude towards sex?
Not in a ton of detail, but we do talk like in this section about overcoming your baggage, about recognizing that a lot of the baggage that we're each dealing with is generational shame and trauma that gets passed on. And I think a lot of people are telling us that for them, they feel the motivation to read the book to do better for their kids. So that even if they themselves feel a little bit nervous, like, I don't know if I want to read this with my partner, I don't know if I'm ready to have the conversations yet, this idea of I want to be a cycle breaker, I want to have my kids have a healthier and happier relationship with sex than I did. So I do think that is really important, because it's very easy for us to feel like something's wrong with me. Why am I so embarrassed about sex? Why do I feel so much shame? Everybody else seems like they're wilder and more uninhibited than I am. But for us to recognize that it's really a collective issue that we're all struggling with, that has been passed down for many, many generations.
Yeah, we got so many questions on how do I have these conversations with my kids, and I think, you know, parents are really motivated to, like, what do I need to say, what do I need to do in order to give my kid a better experience than the one that I had. And our first answer is always, it's getting comfortable with yourself and talking to your partner about it, because kids can pick up on that awkwardness. Vanessa sure did. And I know I did.
Your kid will become a sex
when my
therapist.
parents. So yeah, I mean, just to the extent that you can show up, you know, comfortable and confident and calm in those conversations, like that right there, without even knowing like the exact right line to say, is going to go so far. Yeah.
To piggyback on your father's question, I want to know if you addressed it as we get older, as you know, men and women get older, how it changes. It's different as you get older than when you're younger and your children are grown and they're gone. And do you address some of the physiology changes as you get older also, and your sex drive changes also? So do you address any of that as people are, baby boomers are out there now, and, many times they've been divorced or they're widowed or widowers, and they're embarking on new relationships later in life?
That'll have to be in sex talks too.
Okay.
We jokingly refer to that as sex talks back.
Yeah. There were so many topics.
Well, then I think you need to interview people.
Yeah.
It'll be a while.
There were so many topics that we wanted to cover, but we really wanted to make this book feel doable for people. Like, it's just 5, I can do it.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of topics that we feel very passionately about and that we know really would have helped people that we didn't get to address in this one. But yeah, maybe in Sex Talks Back, that'll be the 6th conversation.
How did you choose the topics that you selected for the book?
Okay, here's a secret. When I wrote the book proposal, it was 16 conversations.
Okay.
We sold it to Simon & Schuster. We got an editor that I really loved and really just vibed with. And so we had our first meeting about the book, and she said, Vanessa, nobody wants to do 16 of anything. So we need to cut this down. And I realized she was absolutely right. And the book was going to be this thick if I wrote it the way that I wanted to. So I had to get very brutal with myself and really figure out, like, what do I think are the 5 core ones that are going to be the most important, make the biggest impact. And I found that I was able to take a lot of those 16 and kind of fold them in together, to these 5 central conversations.
Yeah, so many of those are in here, but not all of them.
Yeah.
Are each of the 5 chapter titles?
Yes.
Yes.
They are.
Yes.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah.
Do you mind reading us what they are?
Yeah.
Oh, you did? Oh, fine.
Yeah.
Oh, you did.
Acknowledgement, connection,
Okay.
desire, pleasure, and
Okay,
exploration.
those are the ones. Okay,
Yeah.
got it. Okay.
And I know the 5 love languages. Now I gotta learn these.
No, we learned there's 7 now.
Oh, there's 7, that's right.
7 love languages.
Communication.
Since you do this professionally, my question for Xander is, putting yourself out there, was it difficult for you to do that, to put yourself out there and to write and to contribute to this?
Well, by the time we started writing this, I think I was feeling a lot more comfortable with it. It was about 2.5 years ago is when I started getting more involved with Vanessa in, showing up on Instagram and talking more about myself personally and our life. But before that, I was really nervous and anxious about doing that. I mean, I kind of hid behind this idea that, well, no one wants to hear from me because I don't have all the training that Vanessa has. I don't have all, the license that she has. I haven't devoted my whole career to this. But Vanessa kept, chipping away, trying to convince me that, hey, people don't, it's not about the experience. Like, you have the experience of a man, of a husband, of a partner, just a regular person that's in a marriage. And so, she would ask me just little questions here or there when she was doing Instagram. And, she started giving me a lot of positive feedback that people were sending to us. And I started realizing, like, oh yeah, people actually, it makes it, it's one thing hearing from an expert, and it's another thing hearing from, an expert and, an expert on the one hand, but also like a regular couple on the other hand. It's just like, hey, this is how it comes up for us. This is what didn't work for us. This is what does work for us. So I eased my way in and started feeling a lot more comfortable. By the time we started writing the book, I was pretty comfortable talking about this stuff, but it took me a while. But I think the takeaway for me is that, yeah, anything that's vulnerable feels hard to do at first, but it's all about creating a habit. Every single time we do it, it feels a little less vulnerable. And after a bunch of repetition, it starts to feel pretty normal and actually feels pretty good. Like, vulnerability is how we connect with other people. So, I think it can be a positive thing to push yourself into those vulnerable things.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just got me thinking with the whole, the pressure on the first time and everything. I think obviously everyone would agree, sex only gets better with your partner over time because you start having those conversations. You start talking about what you guys like and, what turns you on and all that stuff, But what you said that stuck with me was that, what was it, the dopamine or something that gets released, like the lust factor that can only last for 1 to 3 years. And then it's more about an actual connection, Is there anything that in the book that specifically talks about, like, I don't know, keeping the glow or whatever you want to call it, keeping the fire going?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so this phase, that only lasts the first 1 to 3 years, it doesn't mean that now the rest of your relationship is just boring and dull and like, okay, just mucking through another year. So we really wanted to write this book to show couples how to keep the spark alive, how to keep that excitement between each other, and how to find this really nice balance between that comfort and security and trust of knowing each other, of having been together for a long time, but also trying to keep each other on your toes a little bit too and feeling excited. So I think for that question, the main conversations would be number 2, like, what do we need to feel connected to each other? Because emotional intimacy is a lot of what actually fuels that feeling of connection. And also conversation 5, what do we want to try next? Like, continuing to explore new things, because when we try new things with our partner, it's the best way to keep our brains like lighting up and feeling excited.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, back.
Yes, I appreciate, you bringing this book to here in Santa Barbara, with, someone, I've been in the counseling field, and something that's the least talked about that I feel needs to be the most talked about. And even at the same time, being an older adult, I'm driving over here thinking, just wait till I tell my girls, the book, that I went to, but I think, I really appreciate you bringing, breaking down those barriers. That just like, mental health, just like emotional health, the sexual health and sexual beings is so much, it's part of who we are, honestly. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate that. We've had a lot of challenges writing, selling, promoting this book, like so many things that we couldn't do because it's about sex instead of the newest diet that we should all be following. So it feels really good to know that it's having an impact and that it's worth all of the sometimes annoyances of trying to get this message out there. Thank you. Dad, you have another question?
No, it's not a question, I just wanna, put a plug out for your website.
Oh.
We didn't tell him to say this.
Yeah, if you want to buy one of our courses, you can go talk to my dad and he will tell you all about
Very
them.
discreet, yeah, very discreet.
He gets a small commission, but you know, he's retired. He needs to be bringing in some funds somehow. So please find him in the back.
And on that note, we thank you, Vanessa and Xander, for joining us, and thank you.